Alright, bet. So this happened. What's going on, y'all? How y'all doing? It's X again, and we gonna be talking about LaMarcus Aldridge's time with the San Antonio Spurs. So if y'all did not know, LaMarcus Aldridge requested to be bought out by the Spurs because of the direction they were going, and he has not played a game since, ironically, the 1st of March, where he faced, of course, the Brooklyn Nets, where they lost in overtime. Now, I'm not going to talk about the move itself, LaMarcus Aldridge to the Brooklyn Nets. You can only imagine, as a Laker fan, how I feel about that. But again, we got Andre Drummond. But I'm going to talk about LaMarcus Aldridge's time with the San Antonio Spurs and whether or not it was disappointing or was it the West being that tough. So let's hit the rewind button back to 2015. 2014-15 was LaMarcus Aldridge's final season with the Blazers, and after being eliminated by the Memphis Grizzlies in 5 games, many NBA and Blazer fans were curious on what Aldridge's future is with the Portland Trail Blazers. Will he stay and run it back with an much improving Damian Lillard and an emerging CJ McCollum, or will he leave for teams like, of course, the Spurs or the Lakers or the Clippers, you name them. And of course, by the time it was July 2015, he made the decision to sign with the San Antonio Spurs. This was a great day for Spurs fans because they got a player who a lot of people considered around 2015 a top 25 player. And considering the age of Tim Duncan and to a certain extent Manu Ginobili, they figured they should get someone who is not only in his prime, but get a guy who is ready to contend for a championship, and that's what they exactly saw in LaMarcus. And throughout the whole 2015-16 season, they looked like a championship-ready team. They had their best season in franchise history with 67 wins, right behind the 73-win Golden State Warriors. But on LaMarcus' side of things, he really didn't play all that well in comparison to his seasons from 2010 to 2015. And within those 5 seasons, despite LaMarcus not shooting that well from 3, LaMarcus was a 21 plus point per game scorer off really good efficiency. However, in the 2015-16, also I forgot to mention the fact that he played 5 less minutes than he did in 2014-15. During the 2015-16 campaign, he only averaged 18 points, still off decent efficiency, but he kinda underperformed in his first season with the Spurs. But in LaMarcus' defense, Kawhi was not only having an MVP year, LaMarcus was also trying to implement himself in the San Antonio Spurs system where they share the ball and move the ball and players move around, and there's hardly any ISO that you see from any star player. They also had defenders that can surround guys like Aldridge, who is not a good defender, so it wasn't really too much of a problem for him. By the time the playoffs came around, a lot of people expected the Spurs and the Warriors to match up in the Western Conference Finals because of how interesting the series in the regular season was. They did beat an undermanned Grizzlies team without Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, and Zach Randolph, so that round was kind of a wash. But after game 1 of the 2016 Western Conference Semifinals against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where it was basically a Spurs parade all over the Thunder, a lot of fans thought the Thunder were done for and the Spurs were on their way to competing with Golden State in the Western Conference Finals. That was until the controversial game 2, where Dion Waiters obviously fouled Manu Ginobili on the inbound, but the Spurs got the ball and they had a chance to win the game, but Patty Mills airballs a 3, and it looked like the Spurs were in control of the series after winning game 3 in Oklahoma City, but they would get blown out in game 4. They would also lose a critical game 5 at home, that game also being poorly officiated, and they tried to fight as hard as they can in game 6, but the Thunder were just basically in takeover mode. The Spurs ended up losing the series, and a lot of people pointed at LaMarcus Aldridge being way too passive. More specifically, after the first 2 games of the series where he had 38 and 41, he had 24 in game 3, 2 20-point games in games 4 and 5, and an 18-point game in game 6 with a 40-year-old Tim Duncan scoring 1 more point than him. And it was problematic because a lot of people were pointing at the fact that Tim Duncan was getting old and LaMarcus was not doing anything to at least help the team win. It's almost like the narrative was LaMarcus Aldridge was a choker and he couldn't even fit the Spurs system because, as Skip Bayless would put it, he had too much Portland Trailblazer Aldridge in him. Now, arguably, Kawhi should have stepped up as well because he only averaged 23 in the series against the Thunder, with his worst game being 14 points in game 2 where they lost, and with a chance to control the series in games 4 and 5, and to a certain extent game 6. Both Kawhi and LaMarcus did not get the ball enough or had plays ran for him, so it resulted in a minimal amount of shots for him down the stretch. But at the same time, the Thunder defense was actually pretty good too. Also, the Thunder just crushed them on the backboards. They took advantage of their youth and athleticism, as well as their two big bodies at the time, Cantor and Adams, to which gave them a huge advantage on the backboards. And also taking note, Andre Robertson and Steven Adams basically were the two anchors of the Thunder defense, and they made it uncomfortable for both Aldridge and Kawhi. And the problem is age played a factor too. Tim Duncan was getting old. They signed basically a David West that was on his last legs, I guess you can say, because he had a decent 2 years with Golden State. Manu was getting old. Tony Parker was not getting any younger, even though he was around 32, 33 years old. So even if they did beat OKC, I would have a hard time believing that they would actually beat the Golden State Warriors in a 7-game series. Now, they would make it competitive, that's for damn sure, but I'd have a hard time believing that they would actually come out on top, especially with the way Golden State has played, despite what being down 3-1, being up 3-1 tells you. So 2015-16 was pretty much a letdown for LaMarcus Aldridge stat-wise, because he averaged 18 a game on good efficiency, but with how he played in his last 5 years in Portland, he was expected to do more, especially with an aging Tim Duncan, but it would eventually become San Antonio's downfall too, because after winning game 1 and being up 2-1, they lost the last 3 games, which ended their season. Moving on to the 2016-17 season, which was year 2 of the Kawhi Aldridge era in San Antonio. Now, 2016-17 was kind of a weird year for the NBA. Some may argue it's probably the worst and the darkest days of the NBA, because Kevin Durant, as you see on my screen, already joined a championship caliber Warriors team and basically made him into a powerhouse. Other things went on in the NBA that I want to get out of the way. Westbrook and Harden were basically going neck and neck for the MVP award that year. Russ ultimately becoming the winner because he had a triple-double. But in the case of the Spurs, this was the first season without Tim Duncan, as Tim Duncan retired just after the NBA season ended in 2016. But in my view, y'all, the 2016-17 season was much of the same. This time it was just without Tim Duncan. Kawhi having an MVP season, the supporting cast playing well, but LaMarcus Aldridge played a bit worse than he did in 2015-16. In 2016-17, he averaged 17.3 a game on pretty high efficiency. But just like last year, minus the 67 wins, the San Antonio Spurs played really well, and they ended up becoming the 2nd seed again, and they ended up facing the Memphis Grizzlies again. But unlike last year, Memphis had Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, and Zach Randolph back, and LaMarcus was pretty inconsistent in that series, averaging 15 a game on pretty decent efficiency, actually. 47% from the field, but the thing is, if you are the second star next to Kawhi, you're pretty much expected to be the second complimentary scorer, and you're definitely expected to put up more than 15 points a game. But I guess that didn't matter, as the San Antonio Spurs cast stepped up and took care of the Memphis Grizzlies in 6 games. Now, I want to move on to the second round against the Houston Rockets. Despite Aldridge having a breakout game 6 where he had 34 points off of 61% shooting, and that game was a blowout anyway, and James Harden basically faded out of the picture, LaMarcus did not play that well in the first 5 games. Sure, he did have 26 points in game 3. You take that game away, and it's basically the Grizzlies series all over again, except a little worse, because in game 1 he only had 4 points, game 2 he had 15, but that game was a runaway, so I guess no argument there. Game 4 they got blown out, and LaMarcus had 16 points, and LaMarcus had 18 points in game 5, but the thing is, the Spurs cast like Manu Ginobili and Danny Green stepped up, and LaMarcus only had 34 points because Kawhi was dealing with a hamstring injury, and LaMarcus was their only source of offense. But again, the Spurs cast also stepped up when it mattered. And they finally made it to the Western Conference Finals for the first time in 3 years, and they basically had to face a 4-headed monster in Golden State, with Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. And in the first 2 rounds, the Warriors just completely annihilated both the Jazz and the Blazers, winning 7 of their first 8 playoff games by double digits. Initially, this series was about to go the Spurs' way, as for most of game 1, they dominated the Golden State Warriors and basically exposed them on both offense and defense. Kawhi and Aldridge both dominated the game together, and the supporting cast was doing well. But unfortunately, as soon as they had that 25-point lead, and trigger warning if you're a Spurs fan, this happened. As Kawhi went up for the shot, Zaza had the audacity to slide under his ankle and not only injured Kawhi, he changed the dynamic of the Spurs' future, he changed the dynamic of the game, he also changed the dynamic of the NBA because now the NBA has implemented rules that you need to give players space to land. But anyways, after Kawhi went down, LaMarcus Aldridge still played well, but the role players did not play well, and everything just basically went wrong for the San Antonio Spurs. They missed shots, they turned the ball over, and they blew a 25-point lead. And similar to last year, a lot of pressure was put on LaMarcus Aldridge to play well, and no surprise, he did not play well. LaMarcus scored 8 in Game 2, 18 in Game 3, and 8 in Game 4, but the series was a lost cause anyway because they didn't have their best player. But then again, if you're considered the second best player on the team, sometimes the expectations are raised higher to perform well in the absence of the main best player. Russell Westbrook in 2015 was an example of this. When KD went down with a foot injury, Russ basically turned on takeover mode for the rest of the 2015 season, even though his team didn't make the playoffs. CP3 is also an example of this because without James Harden, he averaged 21, 6, and 10 on really decent efficiency, shooting 42% and 35% from 3. And a lot of people expected LaMarcus Aldridge to put up the Portland Trailblazer type stats where he had 21 points a game on really good efficiency, but unfortunately, when the time came for him to deliver in the absence of Kawhi, he flat out choked. And yeah, like I said, it didn't help that Kawhi Leonard got injured in Game 1, and had he stayed healthy, maybe the Spurs would have pushed it to 6 games, but unfortunately that didn't happen. And because of Kawhi Leonard's injury, it altered the whole dynamic of the NBA and the Spurs' future as well. So while the Spurs had a much more successful season than the one they had prior where they had 67 wins and got bounced out in the second round, this season did also end disappointingly considering the fact that Aldridge did not make the jump that he was expected to and averaged less points by 0.7, and the fact that Kawhi Leonard got injured just completely derailed any momentum and any hope for the Spurs to at least make a series competitive against a team like Golden State. So yeah, team success wise, this was LaMarcus's best year, but individually this was probably LaMarcus's worst year as a Spur because he averaged less points in a couple more minutes, because in 2015-16 he had 30 minutes a game, and then the season after he had 32 minutes. So LaMarcus didn't play up to expectation, but the team did make the conference finals, but that was mostly because of Kawhi Leonard and them being one of the best defensive teams all year, as well as being one of the best offensive teams all year. 2017-18, the year without Kawhi Leonard. So these next 3 years that LaMarcus would have with San Antonio would be his best seasons he's had as a San Antonio Spur. But 2017-18 was a different year. Kawhi Leonard was dealing with injury problems all season since that injury he had in the conference finals the year before. And there was a whole lot of drama, tension, and controversy within that San Antonio locker room. And because of that, during the offseason, Kawhi Leonard will request a trade from the San Antonio Spurs, which I will get to later. Despite the San Antonio Spurs struggling without their best player, LaMarcus would have his best season since the 2013-14 season and the 2014-15 season, aka his last 2 seasons in Portland, where he averaged over 23 a game on good efficiency. 2017-18, he averaged 23.1 a game off of 51% from the field. Didn't shoot that well from 3, but again, it was off of like 1 attempt per game, so it's kind of expected. And then 84% from the free throw line. So despite the San Antonio Spurs struggling on the court, as well as controversies surrounding Kawhi Leonard's injury and the team doctors and all that, LaMarcus would have his best season as a San Antonio Spur. And since we're keeping it about LaMarcus Aldridge, unfortunately, his best season as a San Antonio Spur only carried them as far as Game 5 of the first round against the same team that eliminated them in the conference finals. Only this time, LaMarcus will have his best postseason as a San Antonio Spur. In the first game, he didn't play well, but that game was a blowout. He ended up with 14 points. But throughout the whole series in 5 games, he averaged 23.6, 47% from the field, and almost 100% from the free throw line. So he was damn near perfect. And he shot 14 from 14 in Game 5 where they lost. But LaMarcus finally stepped up as a Spur. But none of that would matter as they would still struggle without Kawhi, and the team struggled as a whole. Tony Parker and Manu were at the tail end of their careers, and they would inevitably lose in the first round. 2018-2019, the DeMar Aldridge experiment. So as I said before, the relationship between Kawhi Leonard and the San Antonio Spurs will fall out, and he will request a trade after the 2018 season ended. And Kawhi Leonard would be traded to the Toronto Raptors along with Danny Green for DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl. Even though this vid is about LaMarcus Aldridge, I will explain why this trade went down or had to happen, or however y'all say it. So on DeMar's side of things, the Raptors were looking to go in a different direction after years and years of being a second round exit. 2017-18 was the worst of all of them, because that time the Raptors were the first seed in the Eastern Conference, and because of how much the Cavaliers struggled all year, they ended up losing to LeBron James and a bunch of meh-ish role players. So the Raptors at that point were looking in a different direction, and they were able to retool their roster by trading for Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard. I already kind of explained why Kawhi Leonard wanted to be traded from the San Antonio Spurs, but to put into context, y'all, he wanted to be traded to one of the LA teams. I believe his destination that he wanted to go to was Los Angeles Lakers. But as I explained in my trades video when I mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge to Portland, but the San Antonio Spurs kind of have this petty track record on not wanting to trade players to rival Western Conference teams. But I guess that don't matter anyway, because he was able to sign with the LA Clippers following the 2018-19 season. Going back to the DeMar Aldridge experiment, it was kind of a weird fit because you basically had two of the same player on the team. Both are mid-range masters and whatnot. Both of them are not good defenders. Both of them rely on, post-ups and all that. And because of the weird fit between DeMar and LaMarcus, they ended up being an average team. Sure, they were able to figure things out by the tail end of the season, winning games against really solid teams like the Rockets and the Warriors. But let's put it into context. DeMar in 2018-19 averaged 21.2 a game on 48% from the field, shooting an abysmal 15% from three, while the previous season with Toronto he shot 31%. But when you're looking at LaMarcus Aldridge's stats, LaMarcus averaged 21.3, shooting 52% from the field, 24% from three, which is a bit better than DeRozan, but that's still bad. But he shot 85% from the free throw line. However, since we go and look at Kawhi next, he averaged 26.6 with Toronto, shooting 49% from the field, 37% from three, and 85% from the free throw line, while having guys like Kyle Lowry and Danny Green, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, OG, Marc Gasol, and Serge Ibaka. Basically meaning that Kawhi was already on a Toronto team with a good supporting cast, while the Spurs had Derek White, Bryn Forbes, DeJounte Murray, who got injured at the beginning of the year. Oh yeah, they also had Rudy Gay and Patty Mills too. So the Spurs kind of had a weird roster in terms of fit. And even though they were able to figure things out at the end of the season, Toronto was so much better in basically almost every category. The fit, the roster, the shooting, everything else. They had the best two-way player in the league at the time. And Toronto was basically a championship contender, and they were one of the top teams in the East, while the San Antonio Spurs, on the other hand, despite a good season from both DeMar and LaMarcus Aldridge, they were basically a fringe playoff team. Probably later on in the year, most likely during the offseason, I'm going to be making a separate video talking about the Kawhi Leonard, DeMar DeRozan trade and why I personally think the Raptors won the trade. And it's going to be in similar fashion to what I did with my Tobias Harris trade video. But going back to the Spurs side of things, yeah, they were able to take a second-seeded Denver Nuggets to 7 games, which was pretty dang impressive if I'm being honest with y'all. And both LaMarcus and DeMar didn't play horrible, but they didn't play that well either. LaMarcus averaged 20 points a game in the playoffs, shooting 46%, 26% from three, and 83% from the free throw line, but he only had 3 games where he scored over 20 points. And in Game 7, LaMarcus scored 16 points, shooting 6 for 16 from the field. And DeMar in the 2019 playoffs averaged 22 a game, shooting 49% from the field and 82% from the free throw line, while virtually taking no threes. Game 2 was his best of the series, scoring 31 points. But in Game 7, he shot 7 for 21, scoring 19 points. And remember, this is all within a 7-game series against a 2 seed. So they did expose a lot of holes in the Denver Nuggets team, even though they were a really solid team and the Portland Trailblazers were able to expose them. But on Kawhi Leonard's side of things, he had arguably one of the greatest postseason runs in NBA history, literally averaging 30 a game off of pretty decent shooting splits. And it made people wonder about two things: if DeMar DeRozan was the problem in Toronto, and if the San Antonio Spurs really messed up on the Kawhi Leonard trade. Again, that will be a separate video. So in summary about the 2018-19 season, LaMarcus did have a good season, but it was with a fringe playoff team that was pretty average and inconsistent throughout the whole year. But again, the fit was weird, and there's a lot of players that kind of conflicted the timelines. Like, you had a lot of vets and you had a lot of young players in the rotation. I mean, it was overall a weird year, but the Spurs were able to figure things out and push one of the top teams to 7 games. So people will say this is a success for the Spurs in terms of like what was expected from them. 2019-2020, the year the Spurs missed the playoffs. So in summary, there's really not much to talk about the San Antonio Spurs team from 2019-2020 because they were basically horrible all year. And LaMarcus Aldridge was decent all year. He averaged 19 a game, shooting 49% from the field and shooting 82% from the free throw line. But he shot career high 39% from 3 off of 3 attempts a game. And on the other hand, DeMar averaged 22.1, shooting 25% from 3, but shot 53% from the field, which was a career high for him, and then 85% from the free throw line. But March 10th would be the last game Aldridge would play in the season because, number one, as we all knew, the NBA season shut down, and on June 8th of 2020, the Spurs would announce that LaMarcus would be missing the rest of the 2019-2020 season, more specifically the restart in the bubble, because of a surgery on his rotator cuff. The Spurs had enough wins to make the bubble, but unfortunately, they lost some critical games and they ended up missing the playoffs, which was the first time in Spurs history since 1997, which after that season, they drafted Tim Duncan. So, like I said, not much to talk about here. Just DeMar and Aldridge both had a good year, and the rookies had a lot of upside and showed a lot of potential, but again, their record did not qualify to make the playoffs. So fast forward to present day 2021, LaMarcus would end up averaging 13.7 in his finals season with the Spurs at around 26 minutes a game. Now, this year is kind of similar to last year. With Aldridge, I think they were like the 7th seed, and then post-Aldridge era, they're currently fighting for playoff contention. And after March 1st, LaMarcus decided he was done in San Antonio and wanted to move on to another team that wanted to compete for a title. So I wanted to ask this question. Feel free to leave your comments down below. Was LaMarcus Aldridge's time in San Antonio disappointing? Because there are going to be some Spurs fans that say, yeah, because there was a lot of expectations. There was a championship expectations when Kawhi Leonard was on the team. But some people would say, no, it was not necessarily his fault. The front office is so hell-bent on developing young players, which they have done a really great job developing young talent. But the thing is, when you're a championship team with Aldridge and Kawhi, usually it will be much better to surround them with vets and good talent, like a playmaking point guard who is still in his prime, or another scorer to pair with them, similar to what they had in 2015-16, where most of the veterans surrounding both Kawhi and Aldridge were veterans. And also, the Spurs were in a very difficult Western Conference, meaning that even if Kawhi stayed healthy, there was no way they were going to be a four-headed monster in Golden State. And also, like I said, they lost to a younger Oklahoma City Thunder team when they were in position to win some of those ball games. So some people are going to say that LaMarcus was a playoff choker, and there are other people that are going to say that, look, it was not necessarily his fault, but more the Western Conference just being that good. So leave y'all thoughts and comments down below. And my apologies for not uploading as consistently as I want to, mainly because I've been so tied up with school and such. And I've been watching a lot of March Madness, which kind of staggered my production on this video. But now you have the finished product. So I'm going to try to upload as weekly as I can. But I don't want to promise anything to y'all because school has been kicking my ass.
And, you know, I got to focus on them studies, man. So I ain't got much to say here, bro, but leave your thoughts and comments down below. I didn't want to title this video LaMarcus Aldridge's time in San Antonio was disappointing because, again, it's more so of an interpretation of LaMarcus's time with San Antonio. And I know some people going to have different answers than me, and that's fine. But anyways, like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. And as usual, I'm X. Deuces.